This week's episode is with Haseeb Qureshi. Haseeb went from being a world-renowned poker pro, turning $50 into many millions. He then entered Silicon Valley and eventually started Dragonfly, one of the most respected crypto venture firms, managing over $3 billion. This week's episode is a bit different. We pieced together part of our discussion into Haseeb narrating his life story. We'll later record a part 2 covering the rest of his life. Enjoy. This episode is brought to you by SemiAnalysis, the leading research and consulting firm for AI infrastructure and buildouts. They work closely with many hyperscalers, AI labs, hedge funds, and semiconductor companies that you know and respect. From tracking the inference economics of model deployments to every data center and the supply chains for fabs, servers, electrical equipment, and more, SemiAnalysis is an expert on the topic. If you want to learn more or work in the industry, visit semianalysis.com to see their research and purchase their models. Thanks again to SemiAnalysis and founder Dylan Patel. The Decagon project builds founding go-to-market and engineering teams for venture-backed startups in San Francisco and New York. They built founding teams at Ramp, Cursor, Decagon, Rogo, and many more, while selectively investing through their flagship venture fund. With over a decade of experience and trusted partnerships across the top 15 US-based venture firms, the Decagon project is the premier talent partner for high-slope opportunities in early-stage technology. To learn more, get in touch, or explore roles across a curated list of breakout startups, visit decagonproject.com.
Growing up, going to school, I went to high school in a really small town called Dripping Springs. At the time I moved there was like population of 2,000 people. And I remember when me and my brothers, we moved in, the school system there, they had never had any Muslims in that school. And I grew up to Muslim parents who had emigrated from Pakistan. And so first week I came into middle school, the principal came into the class beforehand to do like a little presentation on what a Muslim was. Because people in that town just had not ever like they see a brown person, they think, oh, Mexican. So it was not a place of intellectual flourishing for me. And I learned very quickly that like the world of the internet was much more compelling than the world that I was in day to day. I remember being active on message boards and chat rooms. I played a lot of computer games when I was a kid, played a lot of StarCraft. And I remember like some of my formative experiences being online. I must have been, how old was that? I was like 11 or 12. And I would go into these MSN chat rooms that pretend to be an adult and just get into all these stupid arguments with much more like, people in their 20s and 30s who require these like more heady intellectual chat rooms talking about politics or philosophy or history or whatever. It was for me kind of an escape from the life that I felt like I was at school, being in, you go to social studies class, you go to English class, you're reading, just whatever is on the curriculum that day. The teachers don't care. The students don't care. They don't care because the teachers don't care. And, but at home, the other thing, it was a small school, kind of in the middle of nowhere. When I hear about people who go to these like really rich high schools that have, courses on philosophy or courses on computer science, we didn't have anything like that. And all these things that I wanted to learn about in the world, I was learning at home for the most part through the internet. And school was this place where I mostly was sleeping all day and, just trying to get by, not get bad grades. So I could go home and explore this broader world. So that's really what growing up really felt like for me, was that the internet was the place where I was really learning and engaging and interacting with the world, which is a big part of the reason why I was so compelled to leave, because the internet represented what somewhere else was like. These people, these ideas, these all this stuff that I was reading and writing about, were all things happening not in Dripping Springs, Texas. My parents emigrated in their early 20s to America. My dad, he was a master's student in electrical engineering, came to Texas A&M, and eventually started working at Texas Instruments and then AMD. So when I was a kid, my dad had a professional career. My mom was not super well educated. My parents had an arranged marriage. My mom didn't know English until I was probably like 6, 7 years old is when she started speaking English. And so as a kid, kind of lived in a very interstitial space between, the world at school, which, was kept Texas, and then the world at home, which was really like this kind of picture of Pakistan in the 80s that was frozen in amber. And then the internet, which was, I didn't get access to the internet until I was like 11, 12 years old, which was this totally other space that represented this tunnel out of these two worlds. And I learned very quickly that I liked this a ton much more than I liked the world that I experienced in school, which was this connection to, this Texasified American culture, and then the world at home, which was this kind of more provincial, Pakistan culture that my parents really held on to. That they really wanted us to be, these good Muslim kids, which is very much the over experience. Is that very often your parents hold on to this version of what they remember their childhood was like, or what kids at the time they left were like. And of course, that going forward into the '90s, into the early 2000s, it's not at all what that part of the world was like anymore. For me at least, like the world that I found, uh, again through the internet, and learning all these different ideas that I wasn't exposed to anywhere else, was so much more captivating to me than what school or home represented. Those were these two holes of both being incredibly bored. The biggest thing was, of course, the sense of not having consequences when you're online, right? Like you could make a new ID, you could join a new chat room, and you could just be somebody else. And in school, you kind of can't do that, right? Like one of the things that's so scary about school is that anything you do wrong is going to be just attached to your identity permanently. And these same people, because it was a small school, so all these same people will see everything that you do, and they're going to remember forever, and they're always going to be that guy. And in a chat room, you can just, make an ID to go in there to be a total asshole and then be a really nice guy. The next day you could be, the next day you could be an atheist. The next day you could be a devout Muslim. The next day you do Christian. You can question anything. You can be anyone. In a way, it's kind of like this playground where you can really play at being anything. And I found that so liberating compared to these rigid environments where everything is remembered and kind of glommed onto you, and there's all these rules you have to obey all the time. I just remember that I remember learning so much about myself by feeling what it was like to to play at being all these different kinds of people. Elements of myself that I couldn't really express, right? Like obviously I the story I told you is somewhat rebellious, but in school it's like really hard to be that rebellious without having really permanent consequences. But when you're online, especially when you're a kid, I don't know, this is a period of time where pseudonymity was much more taken for granted compared to today. Everybody was just a pseudonym in a an MSN chat room, so you could just come in, be somebody for a week, have a bunch of debates with people, get into arguments, like fight, be kind of an asshole, get banned, and then the next week you come back and you're a totally different person as you, and you don't hold on to it. That part of it was the most scintillating to me, was that you could try on an identity for just a little while and see if you liked it. And in school, very often you kind of get pot committed very quickly, right? You sort of like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to be the nerd, and you're just like, well, now I'm typecast. I kind of can't break out. I can't go. So what if I wanted to be a goth? What if I wanted to be a jock? What if I wanted to do this? Kind of like, well, sorry, you kind of get slotted in after week one, and then that's kind of like your friend group. That's your identity. That's your brand as a young man. And obviously, it's not really as humans the way we figure things out, right? Like human beings naturally want to try things and learn things, and that's how one actually does develop an understanding of who you are, is by trying a bunch of different things. I was somebody who very, very drawn to intellectual debate. I'm somebody who very skeptical, and definitely kind of annoyed. That I think there's some of that stuff in that I learned through some of those experiences, is that I'm kind of this gadfly type energy. I noticed that something that continued when I was a poker player, continued into my later elements of my career. When I was 15, I entered into this early college admissions program called the Texas Academy of Math and Science. This college program, basically, it's mostly STEM. You have to study something in STEM. And so I, at the time, read a lot of pop physics stuff. And I was like, oh, I really want to get in. I really want to study physics. I think physics is amazing. I started doing physics, and I realized that, like, oh, this is just math problems. Like, you're just doing math problems all day. And I was like, oh, I actually don't. I mean, I'm good at doing math problems, but this is actually really repetitive. I just got increasingly disillusioned with school, and wasn't really that animated by anything that I was doing. And then one day I was hanging out with some friends, and they invited me to play a game of poker with them. And I didn't know anything about poker. I kind of heard of poker but the only poker game I'd ever played was I played 5 card stud with my cousins. But that was like, it was gamble. We weren't gambling. We were just playing the game. And so I remember I sat down at a little table and we started playing poker, and I immediately lost all my chips. And I didn't even know how the game worked first. I didn't know what checking was, what betting was. I didn't really understand raising. I didn't understand any of the terminology. So I immediately lost, felt very embarrassed. And then it was like, okay, shit, I got to learn how this game works. And so I remember, I go back to my room and I start like looking up a bunch of stuff online about, okay, how's poker work? What are you supposed to do? What's the strategy? And I ended up coming across this article that talked about these young kids who were this new generation of poker players who were, the college age kids who were studying statistics and game theory and all this stuff and making a bunch of money, becoming this new generation of some of the best poker players in the world. And I saw that and I was like, I bet I could do that. That kind of sounds like fun. Now at the time I was 16 years old, so I was too young to play poker. I was too young to really depositing money. And so I started playing play money and playing some of these games online. I started like, oh, okay, I think I kind of have an idea how this game works. So I remember I called up my little brother. He was 18 at the time. And I asked him, hey, so, I'm playing some poker. Actually, I've been reading some articles. I think I have an idea how I can make some money. Uh, would you be willing to lend me $50 so I can start playing? And he was like, what? You're gambling? Like, what are you doing? Supposed to be in school? Like, never tell our parents this. And I was like, all right, screw you. I'm gonna like figure out some other way. I eventually found, so there was this website called Party Poker, and they had this promotion they were running at the time that if you scanned in your driver's license, they would give you $50 for free to get you to start gambling and like ideally get you to deposit more money later. And so I was like, oh shit, this is perfect. This is like the way I'm going to get in. But I didn't have a driver's license. And so this was early days of Google image search. And so I found the first uncensored image or driver's license I find. Uh, and it was like some little old lady from Maryland. And I sent that in, and that's how I started my poker career. And that was all the money I ever deposited because I couldn't get any more. That was the only driver's license I could find. So I worked my way up playing like the 5 cent, 10 cent games, 10 cent, 25 cent games, slowly but surely grinding this amount of money. Uh, and by the summer, I turned $50 into $2,000. And then by the end of that first year, I turned $2,000 into $100,000. And that's where I decided to tell my parents. And so I remember it was, my parents, obviously, they had no idea what college I was doing. They thought I was off studying physics. But I was spending almost all my time, like my grades started suffering. I was spending almost all my time just playing poker. And so I remember I'd come home to visit my parents. I came downstairs and something, it was like the last day that I was visiting home. I was supposed to go back to college the next morning. So I was kind of putting it off and just like, okay, shit, I gotta go tell him. So it's like late night. I come downstairs. I tell him, Dad, I have something I have to tell you. Come to my room and I can tell you. And, the color sinks out of his face. He's like, oh God, that son's gay. And he's sort of marching upstairs behind me. He sits down in the bed. And I tell him, Dad, I have to tell you that I've been playing poker. And he's like, oh, thank God. That's, he's like, okay, how much money did you lose? And I'm like, no, I made money. And he's like, oh, sure. How much money did you make? I said, oh, I made $100,000. He's like, oh, kids got scammed. That's it. He's like, this stupid kid thinks that like this fake website is real money. And like, no, it's real. Like this is real money. Like you look at it, like, look, I threw it to you. And he starts looking at it. He still doesn't believe it was real money. He thinks that like, I'm like an idiot. And I'm playing a play money poker game. And I'm like, I don't know how to prove it to him that it's real. And I'm like, oh, no, look. And I show him this iPod because this iPod was the only thing that I had bought with my first $100,000 because it wasn't in my name. But they had like this loyalty store that if you got enough like loyalty points, you could buy stuff. And so I found myself an iPod. And I remember earlier he had seen the iPod that I had, and he was like, where did you get this iPod? And I told him I won in a raffle. And so I told him like, no, this iPod, I didn't win in a raffle. I got this from this store. And then it like hit him and they're like, oh, my son just made $100,000. And like, that was more money than he was making. And so I remember he just sat for a while and I just thinker. And then he was like, okay, I'm going to talk to you in the morning. Let's go get some sleep. Cause he had to drive me back to the thing in the morning. And so I remember, I wake up the next morning and he's just like waiting outside my bedroom. And, he just tells me, look, don't tell your mom about this. I'll figure out how to tell her. Just promise me that every month you're going to put away $10,000 for your retirement. I was like, sure, cool. And that was how my dad found out I was playing poker. At the time, I was like, fuck all the general, I don't care, college. I got into some big fights with my dad at that time because I was just like, why? My dad really wanted me to choose a technical profession. And at that time, I went through many different phases. At that time, I wanted to be a philosophy professor, but I spent a lot of time believing that that's what I was going to do with my life. And then later thought that I was going to be an author and write fiction. And that obviously ended up being the path I went down. But we ended up having a lot of back and forth. So I ended up originally matriculating to UT Austin with a philosophy major. But then eventually dropped out of school. I think when I was 19, I made over $1 million that year. And I was just very disconnected from what was going on in university because it was just so relevant. I was pretty isolated because I was just playing poker all the time. And I just didn't really, everybody else was like set in STEM and was like, oh, I want to be I want to get to chemistry or math or science or whatever. And I was like, yeah, doing this thing, I make much money. I wasn't doing a lot of studying. It was mostly I was playing poker a lot. I was sleeping very regular hours. So one of the things that one of the things about poker is that it's a very isolating profession because of the fact that you're so off kilter with the rest of the world, right? But poker, you play when the games are good, and the games are good when people get off work. So because otherwise, people are working, and so nobody's playing. So you align your schedule with when the games are the best. And sometimes the games are also the best when Europe or Asia is awake. So you're really playing poker when it makes sense to play poker. And that kind of means that when your friends are awake or when they're getting up or when they go to sleep, like you're just on a totally different time schedule. And this ends up making a lot of things just become more and more kind of self-reinforcing, right? So your sleep becomes really abnormal. Your day-night cycle is totally off. You're eating alone because you're, eating breakfast when everyone else is eating dinner, and you're eating dinner when everyone else is asleep. And so I end up getting pretty depressed various times, and I was a poker player because of how disconnected I felt from other people. Poker, I think, in a way, it's a very weird profession. It's not like a lot of other things because it's one of the most. I'd say it's one of the least pro-social things you grow in your time, right? As a poker player, nobody's on your side, right? You sit down at a poker table and literally everybody there is trying to take your money. And even your friends who are other poker players, you talk to them about your problems, and there's an old saying in poker that everybody who understands doesn't care, and everyone who cares doesn't understand. So your friends and your family, you might tell them like, oh, I lost $50,000 today. And they're just like, oh my God, I can't believe it. Are you okay? And it's like, no, that's not the reaction I need, right? Like that, it's fine, but like it just sucks. I'm having a shitty day. That's all. And the people who really get it, who are like your poker player friends, they're just like, dude, don't complain to me. Like I just had a shitty day. Like I'm not, like I'm not, can't cry on my shoulder. Fuck off. So that you just learn that like, okay, you got to deal with your own ups and downs yourself. It's very stressful. It's for high volatility. When you make a bunch of money, nobody celebrates you because you just took money from everyone else at the table. And so you are very much the only person in your own corner. And that's part of what makes it, I think, very difficult relative to a lot of other professions, especially as a young man. When I dropped out of school, I was already unequivocally pro in that just the amount of money I was making, the amount of stuff I was doing, the amount of time I was spending playing poker. Basically, it was kind of formalizing what was already obviously the case in my life. It was that poker was the main thing I was doing. I think it was probably like by the time I was 17 that it was very clear poker is what I'm doing because I'm, the weird thing is that I never really wanted to be a poker player. I just started playing this game and got really good at it and started making way more money than I thought I was going to make at anything. I wasn't somebody that was very driven by money in the first place. The first year, all I had for all my money was an iPod. And even when I started, playing under my own name, I didn't really withdraw very much capital. because I didn't really have a lifestyle to finance. I didn't really, really spend money on it. It's like once you buy an SUV and a PlayStation and you got a car, it's like, okay, I don't really know what else to do with this money. And so I learned very quickly that money wasn't really what was driving me, and there was much more. I was much more driven by competition. And this is one thing that I learned very quickly, seeing a lot of other poker players, is that people who were driven by money almost never became successful because they were just, it's like, oh, I made some money, then they cash it out, they go spend it, and then they're constantly like playing catch up. Whereas the people who are driven by competition, money is sort of the side effect. Money is the points in the game when you're playing poker. It's how you measure who won and who lost. But the difference is that somebody who just wants to get better, they're going to repeatedly play in the most challenging games. And the most challenging games are not the most profiting games. But if you keep playing the most challenging games, you level up, you get better, you learn more, you get stronger, and then you move up to higher and higher stakes over time because you're just improving faster. And so even though I knew a lot of people who were in poker for the money, they were never the people who actually made the big money. People who made big money almost always the people who were not driven by that. So I was mostly a heads up player. Heads up meaning one-on-one. So I only really played people. Heads up is known as being the most psychological and the most intense form of poker, because when you're playing in a long-handed game with 7, 8 people at a table, a lot of what's happening is really being determined by the odds and just positions at the table. So you're forced to be folding 70-80% of the time, and you can only really play a certain set of hands. A lot of times the hands are doing the talking. And when you're playing heads up, you're playing all this every hand. And so really, it's not so much the cards during the talking as it is the people. And it's the most fun, but it's also the most intense and the most competitive form of poker. And that was all I played. So when I was a poker player, I was very well known at the time. So at one point, I was ranked one of the top 10 online no limit hold'em players in the world. And so I was kind of this very well known figures in the poker world. And so at one point, I was coaching a lot of other players, and one of the guys that took under my wing was this guy named Jira. Was his online name was Jira, and he was this young rising prodigy, and he was very young. He was like 17 at the time, and ended up mentoring him, and he ended up cheating a bunch of players, and I found out about this, and I tried to defend it. And basically, when people found out that he had cheated them, they came to me, presented me the evidence that they had cheated, and I was like, "Yeah, it looked like you did." I tried to see, hey, can we get Jira to pay you guys back for the cheating, and you guys not go public with the story that you cheated with us, because if you do, it's going to destroy his career. Because at 18, like cheating is the cardinal sin of poker. It's like you sort of think like, oh, poker players are all wily, but not really, because it's such an ecosystem built on trust. Your word is the only thing that people can really act on. Like so many, tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars that people are doing purely on their word. And so among gamblers, that's kind of the original sin. I try to protect him, and it ended up blowing up on my face, where these guys basically came out and said that, oh, I was trying to get people to not go public about Jira cheating. I was 21 at the time. I just had no idea what to do. I was so afraid of losing my own reputation over this guy who I in fact cheated, that I tried to run away. I tried to hide, and it ended up totally destroying the reputation in the poker world. Because I was so young, and so much of my identity was wrapped up in being a poker player, that it was just crushing to me, that just to see everything that I had built, like everything that made me feel like I was an important person, like that I had some valued skill in the world, be denigrated felt some. And it was such a huge, important lesson to me in a ton of ways. Not just one, in learning the value of just always being transparent when, no matter what the situation is, but also the importance of realizing that like anything that you have can be very easily taken away. And you have to have the ability, like the mental and psychological centeredness and fortitude to be able to survive it. I walked away from poker after all this stuff went down. And eventually people figured out that like I did cheat everybody. But like at the time, the presumption was that, oh, I must have been in cahoots with him. I must have been also cheating. And there was all these weird conspiracy theories. For me, it was just like, I need to figure out what I actually want to do with my life. Because I had just turned 21. I didn't know, I knew that I didn't want to be a poker player for the rest of my life. Like I mentioned, I never wanted to be a poker player. I just got really good at it, started making all this money. Um, but I knew I wanted to do something more meaningful, but I didn't know what it was. And so I quit poker, and I ended up giving away a bunch of the money that I'd made as a poker player. Um, Realizing that if I had held on to this money, then I would always be kind of living in the shadow of what I built as a poker player. You know, like I didn't want to be one of these people. I had this image very crisp in my mind of working some shitty office job, unjamming a stapler, and just like remembering, like, oh man, I remember when I was playing that heads up game against that guy. But like nothing I'm doing matters relative to the money that I made when I was much younger. And I was like, there's no way that I'm going to be able to become a person that I'm going to respect if I just basically live under the safety of this nest egg. And so I decided to start over with $10,000 and figure out what I was going to do in my life. That was a very pivotal period where I basically was throwing around a bunch of different things that I thought I might do. As I said, one point I thought maybe I'm going to be a lawyer, maybe I'm going to go to business school. And eventually I arrived at this idea that I wanted to come into the tech industry and become a founder. And so I thought, okay, well, what's the best way to become a founder? The answer is I got to get technical. And so I came out to Silicon Valley, went to a coding camp, and learned how to code. And that's what brought me to San Francisco.